Don't you dare come crawling back here expecting anything from us." My mother's voice cut through the phone like a blade. I stood frozen in the parking lot of my apartment complex in Burlington, Vermont, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The autumn wind whipped around me, but I barely felt the cold. "Mom, I don't understand what I did wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we please just talk about this?" "Talk? There's nothing to talk about, Wendy. You made your choice when you decided to embarrass our family with your little rebellion. We've decided you're no longer welcome here. Stay away permanently." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Just 3 days ago, I had been at my sister Brooke's engagement party, celebrating what should have been a joyful family milestone. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare when I refused to lie about my income to impress Brooke's future in-laws. My mother had been furious that I wouldn't pretend to be struggling financially to make Brooke look more successful by comparison. My name is Wendy Parker, and I'm 27 years old. For the past 5 years, I've worked as a senior account manager at Velmark Automation, a thriving manufacturing company that specializes in industrial robotics. While my family assumed I was barely scraping by in my little office job, the truth was quite different. My annual salary of $85,000, combined with performance bonuses, had allowed me to build a comfortable life and substantial savings. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother, Victoria, had always been obsessed with appearances and family image. She lived in the same sprawling house in the wealthy suburb where I grew up, maintaining the facade of prosperity that had defined our family for decades. What she didn't know was that her disappointing daughter had become more financially successful than anyone else in the family. I walked back to my apartment, my mind reeling from the conversation. The familiar weight of family disappointment settled on my shoulders. But something felt different this time. There was a finality to my mother's words that made my stomach churn. As I unlocked my door, I noticed my hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from a growing sense that this confrontation was just the beginning of something much bigger. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Family financial matters require immediate attention. Contact Benjamin Harris, Northwell Financial Services." I stared at the message, confused. Why would a financial advisor be reaching out to me about family matters when I had just been permanently banished? Something was very wrong, and I had the unsettling feeling that the worst was yet to come. Growing up in the Parker household meant living under the constant pressure of maintaining appearances. My mother, Victoria, had built her entire identity around our family's perceived status in Burlington's social circles. She served on charity boards, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and made sure our house always looked like something out of a magazine. My sister Brooke, 3 years older than me, had always been the golden child. She married her college boyfriend straight after graduation and settled into a predictable life of part-time work and social obligations. Brooke understood how to play the game. She knew exactly what to say and how to present herself to earn our mother's approval. I, on the other hand, had always been the family disappointment. After college, I chose to focus on building my career rather than rushing into marriage. I worked long hours, took on challenging projects, and slowly climbed the corporate ladder at Velmark Automation. But to my family, success was measured in terms of social connections and traditional milestones, not professional achievements. The trouble started 5 years ago when I began working in manufacturing. My mother had been horrified that her daughter would take a job in factory work, as she dismissively called it. She couldn't understand that modern manufacturing involved sophisticated technology and engineering, or that my role managing client relationships for industrial robotic systems was both challenging and well compensated. "Why can't you find something more suitable?" she would ask during family dinners. "Something in an office, like working for a bank or a law firm." I tried explaining that I did work in an office, that I spent my days managing million-dollar contracts and coordinating with engineering teams. But Victoria had already formed her opinion, and nothing I said could change it. In her mind, I was the daughter who had settled for less. The financial disparity between my reality and my family's perception had grown wider each year. While they assumed I was struggling, I had been quietly building wealth. My investment portfolio had grown substantially, and I owned my apartment outright, something even Brooke couldn't claim about her house. But I had kept this information to myself, partly out of privacy, and partly because I knew it would complicate family dynamics. Victoria needed to feel superior to someone, and I had unknowingly filled that role. Revealing my success would have disrupted the carefully constructed narrative she had built around our family. The engagement party 3 days earlier had been the breaking point. When Brooke's future in-laws asked about my work, I had answered honestly about my role at Velmark Automation. I mentioned the challenging projects we were working on and the international clients I managed. Victoria's face had darkened with each word. Later that evening, she pulled me aside and demanded that I downplay my success at future family events. "It makes Brooke look bad when you go on about your little job," she hissed. "Can't you just say you're doing okay and leave it at that?" I had refused. And apparently that refusal had been the final straw. 2 days after my mother's devastating phone call, I drove past my childhood home out of habit. What I saw made my heart sink even further. The locks had been changed. New brass deadbolts gleamed on the front door, and when I tested my key, it no longer worked. Victoria had quite literally locked me out of the family home where I had spent the first 18 years of my life. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at the house that no longer welcomed me. The rose bushes Victoria meticulously maintained were already showing signs of autumn dormancy, and the perfectly manicured lawn looked as pristine as ever. Everything appeared normal from the outside, but I was no longer part of this picture. A neighbor walking her dog waved at me hesitantly, clearly confused by my presence. Mr. Henderson had known me since I was a child, but I could see the uncertainty in his expression. Had Victoria told the neighbors I was no longer welcome? The thought made my cheeks burn with humiliation. I drove home feeling hollow and displaced. That evening, I tried calling Brooke, hoping she might help me understand what had triggered such an extreme reaction from our mother. The call went straight to voicemail. "Brooke, it's Wendy. I know you're probably busy with wedding planning, but I really need to talk to you. Mom has cut me off completely, and I don't understand what I did that was so terrible. Please call me back." But days passed without a response. It became clear that Brooke had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. Work became my refuge during this difficult time. My colleagues at Velmark Automation noticed my distraction, but I threw myself into my projects with renewed intensity. Managing the implementation of automated assembly lines for our automotive clients required constant focus, and the demanding schedule helped keep my mind off the family drama. My boss, Director Gregory Walsh, called me into his office on Thursday afternoon. "Wendy, I wanted to discuss the Peterson manufacturing contract. Your work on this project has been exceptional, and the client specifically requested you for their expansion next quarter." The Peterson contract was worth $2.8 million, representing the largest deal I had ever managed independently. Under normal circumstances, this would have been cause for celebration. Instead, I felt the bitter irony of achieving professional success while losing my family. "Thank you, Gregory. I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Are you all right? You seem distracted lately," he observed, his tone gentle but concerned. "Just dealing with some personal matters. Nothing that will affect my work," I assured him. As I left his office, I realized that my professional life was thriving, while my personal life crumbled. The contrast felt surreal and painful. I had everything I had worked for: financial security, career advancement, and professional respect. But I had lost the family connections that I had always assumed would be permanent. That evening, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The call came at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday evening while I was heating up leftover Thai food and trying to distract myself with a documentary about wildlife conservation. The number was local but unfamiliar, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer at the last second. "Ms. Parker, this is Benjamin Harris from Northwell Financial Services. I need to speak with you urgently about your family's financial situation." I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person. I'm not involved in my family's finances." "Actually, you are more involved than you realize," Benjamin said, his voice strained with an emotion I couldn't identify. "According to the documents I have here, you're listed as the primary beneficiary and emergency contact for both your mother's and sister's investment accounts. I've been trying to reach Victoria Parker for 3 weeks without success, and the situation has become critical." My head spun. That's impossible. My mother just told me I'm no longer welcome in the family. Why would I be listed on her accounts? "The paperwork was filed 18 months ago, Benjamin explained. "Miss Parker, I really need to meet with you in person. There are some very serious issues we need to discuss, and I can't go into detail over the phone. Would you be available tomorrow morning? I agreed to meet him at his office at 10 a.m., my mind racing with questions. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, trying to make sense of this development. Why would Victoria list me as her beneficiary and emergency contact while simultaneously cutting me out of her life? The contradiction made no sense. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Northwell Financial Services occupied a modest office building downtown, and Benjamin Harris turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with the kind of gentle demeanor that probably helped clients discuss difficult financial realities. "Thank you for coming, Miss Parker. Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I'm afraid what I have to tell you is quite serious." He opened a thick folder and spread several documents across his desk. "Your mother and sister have been making some very poor financial decisions over the past 2 years. They've liquidated most of their retirement accounts, taken out significant loans against your mother's house, and invested heavily in what appears to be a fraudulent investment scheme." My stomach dropped. "How much are we talking about?" "Combined, they've lost approximately $400,000, Benjamin said quietly. "The house your mother lives in is now mortgaged to its full value, and they owe substantial amounts to several creditors. Victoria has been avoiding my calls because she knows the situation is dire." I stared at the paperwork, trying to process the numbers. $400,000. The house that had been in our family for 25 years was essentially gone. "There's more," Benjamin continued. "The investment firm they put their money into was shut down by federal authorities last month. The principals have been arrested for running a Ponzi scheme. Your mother and sister are among hundreds of victims, but because they borrowed against the house to increase their investment, their losses are particularly severe." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because as their listed emergency contact and beneficiary, you have the legal authority to make decisions on their behalf if they become incapacitated or refuse to address the situation themselves. And Miss Parker," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "based on their current trajectory, they're going to lose everything within the next 60 days, unless someone intervenes." The irony hit me like a physical blow. My mother had banished me from the family for being an embarrassment, but I was apparently her only hope for financial salvation. I left Benjamin's office in a daze, clutching copies of financial documents that painted a devastating picture of my family's situation. The drive home gave me time to process the magnitude of what I had learned. And by the time I reached my apartment, shock had given way to a mixture of anger and disbelief. Victoria and Brooke had fallen victim to a company called Grandview Investment Partners, which had promised returns of 25% annually on real estate development projects. The scheme had been sophisticated, complete with glossy brochures, fake testimonials, and a professional-look office in downtown Burlington. What made it particularly cruel was that the scammers had specifically targeted older adults and their adult children, playing on fears about retirement security. I spread the documents across my dining table and began calculating the extent of the damage. The house, which had been worth approximately $600,000 when my father passed away 10 years ago, now carried mortgages totaling $550,000. Victoria's retirement accounts, which should have contained at least $300,000, had been completely drained. Even Brooke's modest 401k had been cashed out to fund additional investments. The monthly obligations were staggering. Between mortgage payments, insurance, utilities, and minimum payments on various credit cards and loans, Victoria needed at least $4,500 each month just to maintain the status quo. But according to Benjamin's notes, her only income was Social Security and a small pension from my father's company totaling perhaps $2,800 monthly. I called Benjamin back that evening. "How long can this continue before they lose the house?" "Based on their current payment history, I'd estimate they have maybe 6 weeks before the bank initiates foreclosure proceedings," he replied. "The credit card companies are already calling daily, and I've heard from 3 different collection agencies this week. Have you been able to reach my mother? She's been avoiding all contact with financial institutions. I think she knows how bad things are and doesn't want to face reality." After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop screen. A quick online search revealed that Victoria had been tagged in several Facebook photos from charity events and social gatherings as recently as last week. She was still maintaining her public image while privately facing financial ruin. The next morning, I drove to her house again. This time I didn't try to use my old key. Instead, I rang the doorbell and waited. After several minutes, Brooke answered, looking haggarded and avoiding eye contact. "Wendy, you shouldn't be here." Mom said. "I know what Mom said," I interrupted. "But we need to talk about Benjamin Harris and Grandview Investment Partners." Brooke's face went white. "How do you know about that?" "Because I'm apparently your emergency contact and beneficiary, which is something you both forgot to mention when you decided to cut me out of the family." I pushed past her into the foyer, noting that several expensive pieces of furniture were missing. The antique grandfather clock that had belonged to my grandmother was gone, along with the Persian rug that had anchored the living room for as long as I could remember. "Where's Mom?" I asked. She's not feeling well," Brooke said weakly. "Wendy, we didn't know who else to turn to. The investment advisors seemed so legitimate and they said we could double our money in 2 years. We thought we were being smart, planning for the future by mortgaging the house, by cashing out your retirement accounts." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Brooke began crying. "We thought Mom would never have to worry about money again, and I wanted to help pay for my wedding without asking Derek's parents for money. It seemed like the perfect solution. The perfect solution had become a perfect disaster." Victoria finally emerged from her bedroom 20 minutes later, moving like a woman who had aged a decade in the past month. When she saw me standing in her living room, her expressions cycled through surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. "I told you not to come here," she said. But there was no force behind the words. "Benjamin Harris told me everything," I replied. $400,000, Mom. The house, your retirement, Brooke's 401k, all of it gone." Victoria sank into her remaining armchair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. How was I supposed to know they were criminals? They had references, a beautiful office, testimonials from other clients. Margaret Thornton from the Garden Club invested with them and said they were wonderful. Margaret Thornton lost everything too, I said, having done my research. The whole thing was a Ponzi scheme. They used new investors' money to pay fake returns to earlier investors, and when they couldn't recruit enough new victims, the whole thing collapsed. "But the man seemed so knowledgeable," Brooke protested. "He explained everything about real estate development and showed us projected returns based on historical data." "Historical data they made up," I said flatly. "None of those projects ever existed." I pulled out my phone and showed them a news article about the arrests. The principal organizers are facing federal charges for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. They operated the scheme for 3 years and stole approximately $50 million from investors across New England. Victoria stared at the article, her hands shaking slightly. "We're going to lose the house, aren't we? Unless something changes dramatically, yes. You owe more than it's worth, and you don't have the income to make the payments. What about bankruptcy?" Brooke asked desperately. "Could we declare bankruptcy and start over?" "You could," I admitted, "but that would still mean losing the house, and it would destroy your credit for years. Plus, bankruptcy doesn't make problems disappear. It just reorganizes them." The three of us sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. I looked around the living room where I had spent countless hours as a child, trying to imagine strangers living here after the foreclosure. "There is another option," I said finally, "but it would require some significant changes." Both women looked at me expectantly. "I could help," I continued carefully. "I have the financial resources to stop the foreclosure and manage the debt situation, but it would mean acknowledging some things about my life that you've both chosen to ignore." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your disappointing daughter, who works at a factory, has been quite successful. I make more money than both of you combined. I own my apartment outright, and I have substantial savings and investments." Brooke gaped at me. "How much do you make?" "Enough to help," I said, avoiding specifics. "But first I need to understand something. Why did you list me as your beneficiary and emergency contact if you think so little of me and my choices?" Victoria looked away, embarrassed. "Your father insisted on it when we updated our wills. He said you were the most responsible person in the family, and that if anything happened to us, you'd be the one who could handle things properly." "Dad was right," I said quietly. "But after what happened at Brooke's engagement party, I'm not sure I want to handle anything for people who treat me like a family embarrassment." The ball was now in their court. I let the silence stretch between us, watching my mother and sister absorb the full implications of their situation. Victoria's carefully maintained composure was cracking, and Brooke looked like she might be sick. So what happens now? Victoria asked finally, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. Now you decide how badly you want to keep this house and avoid bankruptcy, I replied, because I'm not writing any checks until we establish some new ground rules for how this family operates. I pulled out a notebook and pen, setting them on the coffee table with deliberate precision. First, we're going to have an honest conversation about money. All of it. No more lies, no more pretending, no more maintaining appearances at the expense of reality. Victoria flinched. Wendy, you don't understand the pressure. I understand plenty. I cut her off. I understand that you were so concerned with looking successful that you risked everything on a get-rich-quick scheme. I understand that you were so busy judging my career choices that you failed to notice I was building actual wealth while you were destroying yours. Brooke shifted uncomfortably. We never meant for things to get this bad. Intent doesn't matter when you're facing foreclosure, I said bluntly. What matters is making smart decisions going forward. And the first smart decision is acknowledging that I'm not the family failure you both thought I was. I opened my notebook and began writing. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll pay off the immediate debts to stop the foreclosure proceedings. I'll consolidate your remaining obligations into a manageable payment plan. And I'll help you both develop realistic budgets that don't depend on magic investment returns. Victoria and Brooke exchanged glances, hope beginning to creep into their expressions, but I continued. In exchange, this family is going to operate very differently from now on. No more dismissing my career, no more treating me like an embarrassment, and absolutely no more financial decisions made without consulting me first. What kind of decisions? Brooke asked nervously. All of them. Every expenditure over $500 gets approved by me. Every investment opportunity gets reviewed by me and Benjamin Harris. And both of you are going to take financial literacy classes so this never happens again. Victoria looked stricken. You're asking us to give up our independence. No, I replied firmly. I'm asking you to give up your delusions. The transformation that followed was both satisfying and sobering. Within 48 hours of our family meeting, I had arranged to pay off the most pressing debts and halt the foreclosure proceedings. The relief on Victoria and Brooke's faces was palpable, but I made sure they understood this was not a return to business as usual. I established myself as the primary contact for all financial institutions and creditors, a role that gave me complete visibility into every aspect of their spending. The first monthly budget review revealed exactly how disconnected from reality they had become. $300 for a single dinner at Leonard? I asked, reviewing Brooke's credit card statement. While you're supposedly struggling to pay your mortgage. It was Derek's birthday, Brooke protested weakly. We wanted to celebrate somewhere special. You can celebrate at Applebee's until your financial situation improves, I replied without sympathy. Special occasions don't justify financial irresponsibility. Victoria's spending was even more egregious. Hair appointments, designer clothing, charitable donations to maintain her social status, hundreds of dollars flowing out each month while she claimed poverty. The Garden Club expects certain standards, she argued when I questioned a $200 donation to their silent auction. The Garden Club can expect you to contribute your time instead of money you don't have, I countered. Your social standing isn't worth losing your home. I restructured their entire financial lives with the efficiency I brought to my work at Velmark Automation. Automatic payments, restricted credit limits, and weekly check-ins became the new normal. Both women chafed at the oversight, but they had forfeited the right to financial independence when they lost $400,000 to a scam. The most satisfying moment came when I informed them they would both need to find employment to contribute to the household expenses. Victoria hadn't worked outside the home in 30 years, and Brooke had never held a full-time job. But what will people think? Victoria asked, horrified. They'll think you're responsible adults who take care of their obligations, I replied. Novel concept, I know. The final weeks of implementing my family's financial rehabilitation were a masterclass in poetic justice. Victoria, who had spent years dismissing my career in manufacturing, found herself working part-time at a local boutique, dealing with inventory management and customer service. Brooke took a position as a receptionist at a dental office, discovering for the first time what it meant to have a boss and fixed working hours. Both women struggled with the transition from their previous lives of leisure and social obligations to the reality of actual employment. Victoria complained constantly about being on her feet all day, while Brooke found the routine of regular work hours exhausting. I don't understand how you've done this for years, Brooke said during one of our weekly financial meetings. "Working every day, dealing with deadlines and demanding clients. It's so much harder than I thought." "That's because you never took it seriously," I replied. "You both acted like work was something other people did while you focused on more important things like charity luncheons and social status." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now managing the very people who had dismissed my management skills for years. Every financial decision that had once been made impulsively now required my approval. Every expense had to be justified and documented. The control I exercised over their lives was complete, and I had to admit deeply satisfying. Benjamin Harris proved to be an excellent ally in maintaining financial discipline. He provided monthly reports on their progress and helped me identify any signs of backsliding into old patterns. The fear of losing everything had made both Victoria and Brooke temporarily compliant. But I knew that without constant oversight, they would likely revert to their previous habits. 6 months after the crisis began, we achieved a major milestone. The house was no longer in immediate danger of foreclosure, and all credit card balances had been reduced to manageable levels. More importantly, both Victoria and Brooke had developed a grudging respect for the financial discipline that had saved them from ruin. During our final family meeting of the year, Victoria surprised me by acknowledging something she had never admitted before. "Wendy, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice formal but sincere. "I was wrong about your career, wrong about your capabilities, and wrong to treat you as a disappointment. You saved our family when we were too proud and foolish to save ourselves." The apology felt good, but it couldn't erase years of dismissal and condescension. "I appreciate that, Mom, but this isn't about proving I was right or you were wrong. It's about building a family relationship based on honesty and mutual respect going forward." Brooke nodded emphatically. "I had no idea how hard you worked or how successful you'd become. I feel terrible that we made you feel like you didn't measure up, when really we were the ones who weren't measuring up." As the calendar turned and the first anniversary of the crisis approached, I reflected on how completely the family dynamics had shifted. The daughter who had once been locked out of her childhood home now held the keys to her family's financial future. The embarrassment who wasn't welcome at family gatherings had become the person they depended on for survival. Victoria and Brooke both faced lasting consequences from their financial recklessness. Victoria's reputation in her social circles never fully recovered once word spread about her employment at the boutique. Several of her former friends from the garden club distanced themselves, unable to reconcile their image of her with the reality of her reduced circumstances. Brooke's wedding had to be dramatically scaled back, causing tension with Derrick's family, and forcing her to confront the gap between her aspirations and her actual means. Looking back on that tumultuous year, I realized that while I had gained control and extracted a form of justice from the situation, the victory felt more hollow than I had expected, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching those who had dismissed me learn to respect the very skills they had once scorned.